Welcome to the CEO Review TV.
Good afternoon, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Tanya from CEO Review magazine. Today, we have the pleasure of hosting Amanda Brock, the CEO of OpenUK, a leading organization at forefront of promoting open source in the digital infrastructure landscape. We are thrilled to have her here today to share her insight and perspective on the existing interaction for open source and the digital infrastructure. So welcome, Amanda.
Thank you very much, Tanya. Thank you for having me along today.
Yeah, so that's fantastic, Amanda. Now, here I'll ask some questions from your side. To start off, could you tell our viewers a little bit about OpenUK and its mission in the open source ecosystem?
Yeah, absolutely. OpenUK is quite a different organization. It's been running for just over 3 years, about 3.5 years now. And we looked at life very differently. We basically started the model for a country organization from scratch. So we looked at what was out there and we looked at what we wanted to build. And we wanted to build a modern, future-looking organization that brought everyone together. And we wanted to build something that was fit for purpose in the technology sector. So we started by bringing together the three opens: open source software, open hardware, and open data. And we call those open technology, those three opens. So we look at the three of them collectively. We also bring together a slightly different audience, because although we're about the business of open technology, and our purpose is UK leadership and global collaboration in that business, although we're about the business, we actually start by focusing on people. We focus on the people in our country, the people in our country who work in those spaces or who want to work in those spaces, students, people who are learning, people who have other engagement around it. And by doing that, the companies sort of follow the people. And what that allows us to do is to represent global companies who have a presence in the UK and homegrown UK companies. And we do it collaboratively and collectively, which we think is the future of technology, bringing everyone together rather than causing divide and geographical and geopolitical splits. So we focus on the people, and by focusing on the people, they bring their companies with them, whether they're UK or international, and it allows us to bring together this collaboration around open source and open technology.
So that's fantastic, Amanda. Now, what led you to take on this role of CEO at OpenUK? And what inspired you to campaign open source in the digital infrastructures domain?
So 15 years ago, almost exactly in 2008, I joined a company that some of your audience might know, a company called Canonical. And Canonical is a leading open source company. It was the biggest, I don't know if it still is, but it was the biggest in Europe, and it is the commercial sponsor of the Ubuntu operating system. And of course, that's a much broader thing today than when I first joined. When I first joined, they focused on the desktop and then moved into cloud and other spaces. So working with Canonical, it was very early stage, at least in Europe, to be in a commercial open source organization, or an organization that distributed open source for commercial purposes. And I had a very big learning curve, but I also met a lot of inspirational engineers in particular, people who taught me what open source meant. And what I found was that my values aligned with the values they had and the values of open source. And to me, those values are about collaboration. They're about breaking down barriers and creating a fairer digital society, one where we can all share, we can reuse, recycle, collaborate. So there's a sort of socio-political element to open source that I really believed in. And then from a technology perspective, it was super exciting, because doing that kind of work, that kind of collaboration, it allows for more innovative technology. So I liked that we were on the cutting edge of the technology, as well as doing this stuff that was collaborative and that really created a democratized kind of technology for people. So I'm sitting in London, you're sitting in India. You can reuse code that somebody develops in London, and we can collaborate with people in India and beyond on our projects.
All right. So fascinating insights, Amanda. As open source adoption continues to grow, what are some of the key challenges faced by startup in integrating open source technologies into the digital infrastructure? What?
I think that the biggest challenge right now is the
Mhm,
pace of adoption. And I'm not complaining about it, but 15 years ago, we could never have imagined quite what was going to happen. We
mhm,
couldn't have imagined how popular open source would be and that it would happen so quickly, and in particular in the business space. So
mhm.
what we've seen is adoption that is faster than learning. So what do I mean by that? Well, we have this buzzword curation, and
Mhm.
curation is the good technical processes and hygiene and the good governance all wrapped up together that makes open source done well. And what we've seen is a lot of people adopting open source so quickly that they haven't quite learned how to do it well. In the past, their organizations might have relied on a proprietary company to come in and do those things. And today they haven't quite understood that. So what we're seeing is a big shift and a big move to learn more about open source and how you do it well, so that you create software and infrastructure, as you say, infrastructure that is well maintained and that is secure, or as secure as any software can be.
So those are excellent points, Amanda. Now, how can startup ensure compliance with the open source license while building their digital infrastructure? What do you think about?
So I think what they have to do is they have to get a base understanding of the licenses. And although there are a lot of licenses that are approved by the Open Source Initiative, and I'm a director at the OSI's job is to be the custodian, the guardian of the open source definition. So what that means is that the licenses the OSI approves have met the definition. They've met the 10 requirements it sets out, which include the ones that I like best, 5 and 6, that anybody can use your code for any purpose. So if you're a founder, if you're in a startup and you're thinking about using open source, or you're thinking about open sourcing your code, what you have to understand is that the code that you are distributing can be used by anybody for any purpose, even to compete with you. And once you've got that basic understanding, you'll then find that there are a number of very popular licenses. I think there are something like 7 or 8 licenses that most code is distributed on. And you can get really in depth to that. You can read my book. You can read Open Source Law, Policy and Practice, which has a whole big chapter and all the detailed legal stuff. And you can get that for free at amandabrock.com. You can download it on an open access, non-commercial license. So that was at amandabrock.com. So if you're not using it for business purposes, you can take it for free. But that's a level of detail that a lot of people don't need. You basically have to understand copyleft and permissive licensing, how they work. Copyleft will require you to keep the licensing on any code that you create that includes the original in its simplest form, and permissive licensing will let you do most things with the code, but you have to comply with the license terms, so you have to familiarize yourself with them. And you also have to make the code available where it requires that. So you have to find a way of doing that for others to access the code. And you have to attribute. And attribution is about acknowledging the creators of the code. So in the headers, in the code itself, you will be putting in some detail. And any engineers who are interested in learning more about that, if they haven't committed before, will find that as they get involved in open source projects, the projects will help them to understand better how to do those things.
Okay. So wise advice, Amanda. Now, as open source communities are known for their collaborative nature, how can startup leverages open source projects and communities to overcome barriers to entry and foster innovation?
Yeah, so I think that's one of the key things that open source does. By democratizing technology, it removes lock-in. So what that means is that anybody can access the code. So something like Kubernetes that Google created, you can access Kubernetes for free. You can do that because it's open source. You can also access many of the projects and packages around it for free, and you can reuse it. And you'll do that through repos like GitHub and GitLab. And when you go in there, the good advice, if you first come into a community, you take the code, you use the code and you want to get involved. And generally using the code alone for a business isn't enough. If you use
Okay.
something, you want to engage. You want to know that you have some say in how it's being run and become part of that community. So what you would do is you'd use the code, you would then find the community in that repository, you would join the mailing list, you would join the regular calls the community might have. And at first you probably sit and observe. You don't jump in with both feet. You learn a little bit about how that community works, whether the culture is going to fit you or one of your colleagues in your organization. And then you start over time, maybe to do a pull request, make some code suggestion. Or if you don't feel confident in doing the code, you might want to help with organizing a community event, creating documentation. But finding that engagement is the way forward. And a lot of open source people spend a great deal of time, not just on the GitHubs and GitLabs and the repos, but also in social media, whether it's Mastodon or Twitter. Less on Twitter than it used to be, but there is a lot of communication. A lot of people spend their lives focused around these digital environments.
All right, Amanda. So now, could you share your vision for the future of open source in the context of digital infrastructure and startup innovation?
Yeah, so I think from a digital infrastructure perspective, we've got to a place where today our platform and our digital economy, our digitalized world, whether we're looking at enterprises and businesses or we're looking at the public sector, is built on open source software. So we're already there, and now we're working out the curation, how to do that well, the word I mentioned before. And what I hope to see is this democratized world that I talk about in technology, democratization of technology, where everybody across the globe can access projects, can access code, so that we all have the ability to have this amazing infrastructure. And that will require more and more collaboration from all of us. And I think that what we will see is today, open source is already the majority of code created. I think the future, what we'll see is that open source isn't just the norm. It's very much the normal and the everyday and the majority. And that we will start to see only a few limited kinds of code or pieces of code that aren't shared in this way. And I think for startups, that creates lots and lots of opportunity. Look at what's already out there, look at why it works, why it doesn't work, how you could do it better or differently. Just because something seems successful today doesn't mean it'll be successful in 5 years. And what we've seen with technology companies is they have to constantly reinvent themselves because disruptors come along, and open source brings disruption. Every sector it goes into, it disrupts the existing market. And that's the opportunity you have as a founder to access a lot of code that can help you disrupt marketplaces. But also you have to keep your focus. Don't find that you end up with too many different things going on, or you won't do anything well.
Okay. So looking ahead, Amanda, so now this is our next question. What are the strategies, goals, and initiative that OpenUK has set to further strengthen its impact? What do you think about this?
So we've got a lot going on. We're looking at some government funding to build a model for the public sector, to build a better way for the public sector to manage open source, which may well involve the private sector too. We currently have a survey underway. We do it every May. Over time, it would be interesting to have data from other countries too. But that survey allows us to do analysis on the economics, to do analysis on the adoption and utilization of open source in the UK. And we will have various case studies. We're now looking at AI. Everybody's talking about AI. So we're going to be writing about AI this month. Obviously, security and sustainability are very high up our agendas. And on the 14th of September, we hope to have in Scotland, we will be having in Scotland, an event which I hope will be streamed called the Open Technology for Sustainability Day, looking at how we can create more sustainable technologies, greener software, that kind of thing, how we can focus on things like data centers and EV charging, having better technology that create less emissions for a better future. So we have a lot going on in sustainability around our reporting, around infrastructure for the public sector, We always have stuff going on with our community, bringing them together. Our awards will launch in June for this year. It's our 4th awards. And we will also be launching later this year, I hope, a massive open online course. And that might be interesting to your audience. It's going to be OpenUK's Business of Open Source Software. And it's going to teach through Strathclyde University in Scotland the skills that are needed for business people around open source software. So engineers who want to set up a business, people who want to get involved in open source businesses, over 5 or 6 lessons, which you'll be able to do digitally, that will teach you some of the core skills.
Okay, that's nice, Amanda. So now, can you share any exciting projects or partnership that Open UK is currently involved in or planning for the future?
I think I probably just did. We should probably edit that one out.
Come again?
I've already answered that one, so we should probably edit this one out. That's the same question.
So the next. Okay, as CEO of OpenUK, what advice would you give to aspiring entrepreneurs and startups who are considering adopting open source technologies?
So I would tell them to do it. I would tell them to do it, but to think through what they're doing. And it depends on whether what you want to do is use open source that someone else has created or make your own open source. And when we look at the journey companies who use open source go on, we talk about them being consumers, we talk about them being creators, and we talk about them being distributors. So as a consumer, I think it's a no-brainer. I think that you will, whether you mean to or not, be using open source in that way. You'll consume open source in your organization. You should take advantage of it. You should engage with communities and learn how to be part of those communities around it. Don't just be a consumer. The next part is the contribution, so giving back, and that's what I'm talking about with those communities. But also, if you're thinking about contributing your own code as open source, I would suggest that you pause and you think about what that means. And I mentioned earlier on definitions 5 and 6 of the open source definition, that anybody can use your code for any purpose. Now, if you're a business, that includes your competitors, and you have to think about what that means to you. So somebody else could take your code and they could make money from it. Somebody else could take your code and they could compete with you. Somebody else could take your code and make more money than you, doing the same thing as you or doing something different. So it's really important to think through how that's going to impact your business. So as you start to look at open source, as a founder, recognize that open source is not a business model. The software, open source is lots of things to different people. So for me, I mentioned that it's a value set, that it matches my value set, that it's social, political. It can be about community collaboration with no money involved. It can be about companies coming together to collaborate, or a mixture of those two. And it can just be about creating the best innovation. But you have to think through what it means to you, how using it for how making your own code open source is going to impact your business, and how you're going to generate revenue. There's a line in a movie: if you build it, they will come. That won't happen. You have to engage to get people to come. They have to know you're there. They have to see you. So you have to create visibility. And you have to do that through things like social media, through things like GitHub and the repos, through engaging with communities, through going to conferences, whether they're digital or in person, through having presence at events. And a long time ago, I said to a friend who's very involved in open source, everybody asks you to speak, nobody asked me. And she said to me, oh, Amanda, nobody asks anyone, you have to apply. And I didn't know this. So there's generally a process called a CFP, a call for papers. And right now, we're sitting on the 31st of May. There's one going on in London for Civo Navigate. There's one going on with the Eclipse Foundation for a German conference. There's one with Open Compute for their San Jose conference in October. And Linux Foundation have a couple going on. So you have to know that those are going on. You have to follow those conferences. You have to submit your talks. Many of them will actually give travel expenses, particularly if people haven't attended conferences before. They're from diverse backgrounds or diverse countries. So it's definitely worth, when you're in a startup, applying for that travel bursary or diversity funding to allow you to attend a conference and give a talk. And by giving those talks, you'll build confidence and you'll get to know people and you'll get to be part of a community. And I often say that finding the doorway in is the hard piece with open source. Once you're through the door, people are very welcoming. So it's just finding your way into that community. But it seems daunting because you have to learn how to get your CFP accepted. And none of us are perfect. I've never had one accepted for KubeCon. So this year I spoke at rejects because I didn't get into KubeCon again. I have to keep working on that. And we all grow and we learn from what we do. So I would recommend that you engage in the relevant communities, that you find out what conferences. So in February, there's something in Europe called FOSDEM. It's always the first Sunday in February and the Saturday before, whether that's in January or February. And in the UK, in London, we'll be having State of OpenCon, which will be around that date. So I would recommend that you make a trip and try to come to both of those, and that you apply for travel funding if you can. Not everybody will get it. Not everybody will get their talk accepted, but you have to just keep trying. And if you are coming from somewhere like India, you'll need a visa, which means that you'll need to apply a long time in advance.
Okay, so thank you so much for your views, Amanda. Lastly, how do you envision Open UK's role involving in the coming years to support the evolving needs to startup and the digital infrastructures ecosystem?
So you broke up. Do you want to say that one again?
Lastly, how do you envision Open UK's role involving in the coming years to support the evolving needs of startup and the digital infrastructure ecosystem? What do you think about this?
I think it's really interesting. Thank you for asking that, Tanya.
Yeah.
I expect to see us engage more and more internationally. So we often say that we have to focus locally to collaborate globally. And the UK has been going through a couple of years of Brexit, which has meant that after, it happened all at once, but it took a couple of years to sort out the consequences and all the treaties and things. And what we're seeing is many more people coming into the UK on talent visas. So we're developing more and more of a technology hub here. And I suspect you'll see us grow as we get more support, as we engage more in things like training. So you'll see more training. The MOOC from Strathclyde will be a start point. We'll be reissuing our kids camps next year, and we'll be looking at doing something for younger children. All of those resources are available Creative Commons, so people in other countries can take them and recycle them. We will also be doing more and more engagement with people in other countries. You've seen that we have probably international ambassadors. Anybody interested in getting involved with the international work we do can contact us at admin@openuk.uk. And we're always looking for more international partners to join with us in the work that we do. I think you'll see more around our reporting and the kind of data that we're gathering, because that data is really important for country understanding of where open source fits and how they compare to the rest of the world. And nobody else has been doing that. So I think you'll see more and more around that space. So hopefully we'll also see many more of you at the State of OpenCon, which will be at the end of January, beginning of February. The date should be announced in the next month. You'll get that at stateofopencon.com, which is quite hard to say, but you can also see it at openuk.uk. And at the top of our website, you'll find there's a click button for a newsletter, which goes to people all over the world. Follow us on social media, openuk_UK, and on LinkedIn and Mastodon. And you'll find out more and more as we keep growing. But there's lots going on. There's always lots going on.
Okay. So thank you so much, Amanda, to be here for the interview. It's a pleasure to have you on our show today. And to our viewers, thank you for tuning in this insightful discussion with Amanda Brock, the CEO of OpenUK. Be sure to stay connected with the CEO Review Magazine TV and for more engaging interviews and thoughtful, provoking content. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.